It was another glorious day in the hyperspace rift zone, a hellish, swirling, ion-charged slice of interstellar real estate that nobody in their right mind would want to inhabit. Except, of course, for Captain Zeth Meerden and his merry band of miscreants aboard the UHS Resolute. The very name of their ship was a cosmic joke, emphasizing the stubborn determination of humanity to cling to life where no sane being should. "Zeth, you ever wonder why we do this?" asked Callie, the ship's ever-sarcastic navigator, as she squinted at a console that looked like it had been cobbled together from spare parts and bad intentions. "Do what?" "Patrol the ass end of the universe waiting for an alien menace to take a bite out of us." "Nah, never crosses my mind," Zeth replied, reclining in his captain's chair, which had seen better days and far less duct tape. "Well, when you put it like that, it sounds almost romantic," Callie snarked back, flicking her dyed black hair out of her eyes. She adjusted the settings on her holo display, ignoring the faint smell of burnt circuitry that permeated the air. Got an unusual energy spike on the sensors. Could be our Vexari friends coming to play. Friends? You mean those tentacled nightmares with a penchant for disemboweling anything with a pulse? Zeth grunted. You have a funny definition of friend, Callie. What can I say? I'm a people person, she shrugged, a smirk playing on her lips. The UHS Resolute wasn't much to look at, but it was home, a cobbled-together testament to human ingenuity and the power of duct tape. The hyperspace rift zone was a byword for chaos and impending doom. Occasional cosmic storms would fry a ship's systems faster than you could say goops, and that was on a good day. Today, it seemed like the universe was in a particularly foul mood. Cap, you might want to get up here, crackled the voice of their irritable engineer Mace over the comms. Got some red lights flashing down here, and they ain't Christmas decorations. On my way, Mace. Zeth pushed himself up from his chair with a groan, his body protesting the movement like an old machine trying to sputter to life. He ambled down the narrow corridors, which were just wide enough to give the illusion of not being a complete death trap. Mace was elbow-deep in a panel of sparking wires when Zeth arrived. Sweat glistened on his brow as he muttered curses that would make a pirate blush. Damn ship's acting up again. I swear these systems are older than my grandmother's underwear and twice as likely to fall apart. Mace, I really don't need that mental image, Zeth said, peering over his shoulder. What are we looking at? Energy surge off the starboard bow, Mace grunted, a wrench clamped between his teeth. Could be a malfunction. Could be the Vexari getting feisty again. Feisty like a cat in a room full of rocking chairs or feisty like a rabid dog? Zeth asked, drumming his fingers on the bulkhead. Let's just say if it's the Vexari, we might want to start riding our wills, Mace replied with a grim chuckle. Zeth sighed, running a hand through his unkempt hair. Just another day in paradise, huh? If paradise was a radioactive wasteland filled with homicidal aliens, Mace added helpfully. Back on the bridge, Callie was fiddling with the holo display. Zeth, whatever's out there, it's big, and it's getting bigger. Zeth leaned over the console, eyeing the blinking dots that represented God knew what. Bigger like a minor inconvenience, or bigger like we're gonna need a bigger ship. Bigger like oh crap, we're screwed, Callie replied, deadpan. Great, just great. Zeth rubbed his temples. All right, let's get ready to dance with our tentacled pals. All hands on deck. As the crew assembled, Zeth couldn't help but marvel at the motley collection of renegades he'd somehow been saddled with. Callie snarky and unflappable, Mace grumbling but brilliant, and then there was Tessa, their resident weapons expert who loved her guns more than most people loved their kids. So, we gonna blow something up or what? Tessa asked, her eyes lighting up with a dangerous gleam. If we're lucky, Zeth said. We got a possible Vexari incursion on our hands, folks. Lovely, she said, cracking her knuckles. I've been itching for a good fight. Just remember, they fight dirty, Zeth reminded her. So do I, Tessa replied with a grin that promised violence. As the Resolute drew closer to the source of the energy spike, The tension on the bridge was as thick as the layer of grease on Mace's coveralls. Everyone was on edge, which was pretty standard when you were potentially about to be vaporized by alien invaders. "Callie, what have we got?" Zeth asked, his voice calm despite the chaos swirling around them. "Energy readings are through the roof. It's like a Vexari rave out there," she answered, tapping furiously at her controls. "Let's hope they're not playing any requests," Zeth said, strapping himself into his seat. "Mace, if they start shooting, make sure we've got enough juice to get us the hell out of here," Zeth ordered. "I'll do my best," came the engineer's voice through the comm. "But no promises. This old girl ain't exactly a sprinter. Story of my life," Zeth muttered. The first sign of the Vexari was a shimmering distortion in space, a ripple like a pebble tossed into a pond, except this pond was about to unleash a horde of furious, tentacled hell beasts. Zeth's stomach churned as he felt the familiar thrill of impending doom. "There they are," Callie whispered. "Like clockwork. The alien ships emerged from hyperspace with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer, their sleek, organic forms gliding through the rift like predators scenting blood. "All right, folks, showtime," Zeth declared. "Let's give them a warm human welcome." Tessa was already at her station, her fingers dancing over the controls with practiced ease. "Let's see how they like a face full of plasma," she said, firing a volley at the nearest Vexari ship. The bridge shook as the Resolute returned fire, the sound of distant explosions reverberating through the hull. "Nice shot," Zeth yelled, bracing himself against the sudden jolt. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that, Tessa?" Callie asked, eyes wide. "Oh, you know, summer camp," Tessa replied with a wink. The Vexari didn't take kindly to being shot at, go figure. The alien ships swarmed the Resolute, their eerie blue energy weapons lancing out to slice through the void. "Incoming!" Mace shouted over the PA system, the ship shuddering as a bolt of energy slammed into the shields. "Status!" Zeth barked, clutching the arms of his chair like it was some magical talisman that could ward off annihilation. "Shields holding, but they won't last forever," Callie reported. "Great. Let's make them count," Zeth said, gritting his teeth. Tessa unleashed a barrage of missiles, the ship vibrating with the force of the launch. "Eat this, you slimy bastards," she yelled, the missiles streaking through the void to find their marks. The Vexari ships danced in the rift's currents, agile as shadows, but Tessa's aim was true. Explosions flared in the darkness, sending debris spiraling away. "That's one for the good guys," Zeth said, a rare grin splitting his face. "Don't get cocky," Callie warned, her fingers a blur on the controls. "Wouldn't dream of it," Zeth replied, though the thrill of the fight was undeniable. But the Vexari weren't done yet. More ships poured from the rift, a tidal wave of alien malice that threatened to swallow the Resolute whole. "This is getting ridiculous," Mace groaned. "We don't have enough firepower for a party of this size." "Then we'll just have to crash it," Zeth said grimly. "Callie, plot a course through the rift." "Through it," Callie echoed, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Unless you've got a better plan," Zeth said. "Nope, just wanted to make sure you were completely insane," she replied, setting to work. The ship lurched as Zeth took manual control, steering the Resolute into the heart of the rift. The fabric of space itself seemed to twist and writhe around them, reality bending in ways that made the crew's stomachs churn. "This is either going to be genius or get us all killed," Callie said, her voice tight with tension. "What's life without a little risk?" Zeth called over the chaos. "Longer," Mace retorted, clinging to his station. As the rift's energies whipped around them, the Vexari ships hesitated, caught off guard by the humans' audacity, or maybe they were just confused by the sheer stupidity of it. "Punch it, Zeth," Tessa urged, her voice practically vibrating with adrenaline. The Resolute's engines roared to life, the ship hurtling through the rift with reckless abandon. For a moment, it seemed like they might just pull it off. The Vexari swarm faltered, thrown into disarray by the humans' suicidal maneuver. "Looks like we're gonna make it," Zeth said, a hint of disbelief in his voice. But before anyone could celebrate, the rift spat them out into a new horror, the heart of a Vexari fleet, ships as far as the eye could see, blotting out the stars. "Oh, you've got to be kidding me," Callie groaned. "Well, this just got interesting," Zeth said, shaking his head. And with that, the Resolute plunged into the fray once more, defying fate and Vexari alike in a dance as reckless as it was desperate. "Hold onto your butts, folks," Zeth called, steering them into the storm. "It's gonna be one hell of a ride." The Vexari fleet stretched across the void, a nightmare of sleek, predatory lines and enough firepower to make a sun nervous. The UHS Resolute, by contrast, looked like a dented soup can that had wandered into the wrong neighborhood. A neighborhood where everyone carried a plasma rifle and had unresolved anger issues. "Well, we wanted excitement," Zeth muttered, hands white-knuckled on the controls. "Gotta love cosmic irony." Callie surveyed the tactical display, now a frantic mess of red blips. "I've seen smaller crowds at a space bar's happy hour," she noted with a grimace. "Looks like they're rolling out the red carpet for us." "Red carpet or red alert, take your pick," Tessa chimed in, her fingers dancing over her weapons console. Her eyes gleamed with a mix of fear and thrill, a dangerous cocktail if ever there was one. "Either way, they're not here to swap recipes. Time to test that human ingenuity we're so proud of," Zeth declared, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Mace, how are we looking down there?" "Like crap," Mace's voice crackled over the comms, underscored by the symphony of clanging tools and swearing. "Every system's on the verge of a nervous breakdown, and I'm this close to joining them." "Great, keep it together," Zeth said, steering the Resolute into a slow, evasive spiral. It was like trying to dance a waltz in a minefield with 2 left feet and a hangover. A barrage of energy beams lashed out from the Vexari ships, lighting up the darkness like a particularly hostile fireworks display. The Resolute shuddered under the onslaught, the shields flaring and groaning with the strain. "Shields holding," Callie reported, though she didn't sound thrilled about their chances. "But we can't keep playing the piñata forever. Eventually, they'll crack us open." Tessa unleashed another salvo, her expression a mix of exhilaration and grim determination. "Let's see if we can return the favor, shall we?" The plasma bolts leapt from the Resolute, streaking through the blackness to meet the Vexari ships. One found its mark, puncturing a hull with a satisfying explosion. "Nice. That's one down," Tessa crowed, her grin wide. "Only a few dozen more to go," Callie quipped, rolling her eyes. "Optimism, Callie, optimism," Zeth said, though he could feel the weight of their predicament settling heavily on his shoulders. "If we start counting the odds, we might never stop." The Vexari, apparently realizing they weren't dealing with a pushover, closed ranks, tightening their formation like a noose around the Resolute. Their strategy was clear: box the humans in, cut them off, and finish them at their leisure. "Looks like they want to play siege," Callie observed, her tone unimpressed. "Must be nice having options." "Options are for people with resources," Zeth replied, steering them towards the edge of the fleet's circle. "We've got grit, duct tape, and a bad attitude." Mace's voice crackled over the comms again, sounding more harried by the minute. "Captain, I hate to break it to you, but we're running low on both grit and duct tape." "Don't tell me the attitude's running low too," Zeth joked, needing the levity more than he cared to admit. "Never," Mace shot back. "But we're gonna need more than attitude to get out of this one." Tessa's station beeped a warning and she cursed under her breath. "Incoming transmission from the Vexari. I wouldn't bet on it being a surrender." "Patch it through," Zeth ordered, bracing himself. The holo display flickered to life, revealing a Vexari commander, its visage a mass of tentacles and eyes. It spoke in a guttural, clicking language that the Resolute's translation software struggled to keep up with. "Humans, surrender your vessel and prepare for boarding. Resistance is futile," the Vexari intoned, as if reading from a script. Zeth leaned towards the display, a sardonic smile playing on his lips. "I'd love to, but we just cleaned the carpets." "Maybe next time." The Vexari didn't seem amused, though it was hard to tell with all those eyes. The transmission cut off, leaving the crew in tense silence. "So negotiations were a bust," Callie observed, deadpan. "Any brilliant ideas?" "Always," Zeth said, though he wasn't sure if he believed it himself. We're gonna slip out of this noose. Ah, the classic underdog strategy, Mace chimed in. Do we have a plan B for when they inevitably close it tighter? We do what we do best, Zeth replied. Improvise and hope we don't die. The Vexari ships moved in again, their formation a meticulous, deadly dance. It was like watching sharks circle a wounded prey, a spectacle both mesmerizing and deeply unsettling. Okay, I've got a crazy idea, Callie said, her fingers flicking over the holo display. We lure them in closer, then veer hard to port. Might give us a gap to slip through. Zeth considered the plan, nodding slowly. Crazy, but it might just work. Let's give it a shot. The ship lurched as Zeth executed the maneuver, a sharp, bone-rattling twist that sent unsecured items flying. For a moment the Vexari hesitated, surprised by the sudden movement. Now, Tessa, Zeth shouted. Tessa unleashed another volley, targeting the ships closest to their escape vector. Explosions rippled through the enemy ranks, momentarily throwing their formation into chaos. There's our gap, move it, Callie urged, her voice tight with adrenaline. The Resolute surged forward, engines straining, hoping to slip through the opening before the Vexari regrouped. It was a desperate move, but then desperate was practically the crew's middle name. They're closing in, Mace warned, his voice crackling with tension. We won't get another chance like this. Then let's make it count, Zeth said through gritted teeth, pushing the engines harder. The ship skimmed through the gap, the hull groaning in protest. For a heartbeat, it seemed like they might just make it out, like the universe had decided to take a coffee break from screwing them over. But the Vexari weren't about to let their prey slip away so easily. The gap narrowed as their ships closed in, boxing the Resolute in with deadly precision. Well, it was fun while it lasted, Callie said, a resigned note to her voice. Tessa slammed her console in frustration. Damn it, we were so close. We're always close, Mace grumbled over the comms. Close to death, close to madness, take your pick. Zeth exhaled slowly, trying to keep his composure. All right, new plan, we hold out as long as we can. Mace, get those engines ready for another burst when I call for it. Copy that, Mace replied, though his voice was edged with anxiety. I'll see what I can scrounge up, but I'm not promising miracles. The Resolute drifted in the center of the Vexari formation, the enemy ships pressing in on all sides. Their weapons were silent for now, but it was the quiet of a predator savoring the hunt. Cut off from everything, Callie murmured, staring at the tactical display. No comms, no backup. Just us and them. Sounds like a party, Zeth said, forcing a grin. Hope everyone brought a gift. All I've got is bullets, Tessa replied, checking her systems. That's more than enough, Zeth assured her. They'll love him. The tension on the bridge was palpable, a mix of fear and determination that hung in the air like static. The crew were isolated, outgunned, but they were still fighting, still defying the odds with every breath. Think we'll make it out of this one? Callie asked, not really expecting an answer. One way or another, Zeth replied. We always do. The Vexari moved in closer, their ships a looming presence on every side. It was a siege in the most literal sense, cut off, surrounded, and facing certain doom. But for the crew of the Resolute, this was just another day at the office. All right, folks, Zeth said, his voice steady. Let's show these aliens what human stubbornness looks like. The Vexari ships opened fire again, a barrage of energy lancing out to hammer the Resolute's shields. The ship shuddered and groaned, the hull creaking like an old man's bones in winter. Shields are holding, Callie reported, though her expression said not for long. Holding on by a thread, Mace added, his voice a grim echo over the comms. I might be able to divert some power, but it's gonna be tight. Do what you can, Zeth said, fingers flying over the controls. We need every scrap of power we can get. The Vexari pressed their advantage, closing in with relentless precision. It was a slow, crushing inevitability, like being caught in the jaws of a trap. Keep firing, Tessa, Zeth urged. Make him pay for every inch. Tessa responded with a volley of plasma bolts, each one a defiant shout in the face of overwhelming odds. Come on, you ugly freaks. Is that all you've got? The Vexari ships flinched back, their formation wobbling under the unexpected resistance. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. "Nice shot, Tessa," Callie said, her grin a flash of white in the dim light. "Maybe we can teach them a thing or two about persistence." "Don't get too cocky," Zeth warned, though he couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. "We're not out of this yet." The Resolute dipped and weaved, dodging energy beams with all the grace of a drunken butterfly. It was a desperate dance, each move calculated to keep them alive just a little longer. "Got a plan, Captain?" Mace asked, his voice carrying a note of challenge. "Working on it," Zeth replied, eyes scanning the chaos outside. "Just keep us ticking over." In the heart of the storm, the crew fought on, outnumbered and outgunned. But despite the odds, they were still in the game, still defying fate with every breath, every shot fired. "All right, crew," Zeth said, his voice carrying a stubborn edge. "Let's give them hell." And with that, the Resolute surged forward into the fray, a defiant speck in the vastness of space. The crew may have been isolated, but they were far from defeated. They were human, after all, and humans had a way of surprising even the universe itself. The Resolute hung in space like a rusted nail in the universe's tire, dangerously close to deflating. The Vexari were tightening their grip, and any moment now, they'd be squeezing the life out of the crew. It was the kind of day where a good mood was about as useful as a parachute in a submarine. Captain Zeth Meerden leaned back in his chair, surveying the battered bridge. "Anyone else feel like we're stuck in a cosmic blender set to puree?" Callie glanced up from the tactical display, her lips twisted in a sardonic grin. "Only if the blender's low on power and the buttons are jammed." "Nice to know we're in peak condition," Zeth replied, eyes flicking to the holo display where the Vexari's menacing formation loomed like a bad case of space acne. Mace's voice crackled over the comms. "Captain, I've got good news and bad news." "Start with the bad. I prefer to save dessert for last." "The engines could use a break. They're wheezing more than a retired marathon runner, and we're not far off from a catastrophic meltdown." Zeth winced. "And the good news, I found an extra roll of duct tape." "Well, hell, Mace, that's practically a victory speech," Callie interjected. Sarcasm was her first language, everything else was just a dialect. Tessa, at the weapons station, shifted uneasily. Her gaze remained glued to the Vexari ships. "We're not out of missiles either, but we're close enough to send a postcard." "Send one to my ex while you're at it," Zeth suggested dryly. "Tell her I'm in a committed relationship with death and losing arguments." The Resolute jolted violently, the hull groaning like an old man with a bad back. Zeth held onto his seat, pretending the sudden lurch didn't make his heart skip a beat. "Shields are taking a pounding," Callie reported. "We might want to consider a plan B before plan A becomes plan O crap." "Working on it," Zeth said, even though working was a generous term for frantically trying not to die. "Maybe we should throw a rave," Mace suggested over the comms. "Invite the Vexari, show them humans know how to party." Zeth turned that idea over in his mind. "A rave, huh? Not the worst idea. If nothing else, we can confuse them with our terrible dancing." "Captain, are you suggesting we weaponize awkwardness?" Callie asked, her eyebrow arching skeptically. Zeth grinned. "It's been my secret weapon for years." "Well, before we turn this ship into a disco inferno, I had another thought," Callie said, leaning forward. "We could try messing with their sensors." Zeth's interest peaked. "I like where this is going. Explain." "Give him something to look at," Callie continued. "A decoy. We send out a few drones, make it look like there's more of us than there really are, playing hard to get with killer aliens," Mace mused. "Bold move," Tessa snorted. "I've had worse dates." Zeth rubbed his chin. "All right, let's do it." "Mace, can you rig up something to make our handful of drones look convincing?" "I'll need to cannibalize a few things," Mace replied. "But I can get them looking like they're worth a second glance." "Good. Get on it," Zeth ordered. "Callie, keep those Vexari blind as bats." "At least bats have the excuse of being blind," Callie muttered, her fingers darting over the controls to work her techno-magic. The bridge was filled with the soft hum of frantic activity, the crew operating like the haphazardly assembled family they were, arguing over whose turn it was to do the dishes while the house was on fire. Mace's voice crackled back through. Drones are ready. Frankenstein would be proud. Zeth nodded. Release the hounds. The ship shuddered slightly as the drones were launched, their tiny forms disappearing into the void. If all went well, the Vexari would soon have more targets than their overworked sensors could handle. Let's see if the tentacle brigade takes the bait, Callie muttered, glancing at her display. And if not, at least we can say we tried. Tessa's fingers hovered over her console, ready to unleash hell if things went sideways. Hope they like surprises. Zeth watched the screen intently, hoping the Vexari would buy their illusion. Come on, take the bait. The Vexari ships paused, their movements faltering as they tried to process the sudden influx of signals. For a moment, it seemed like they might just be confused enough to buy the ruse. They're hesitating, Callie reported, her voice tinged with cautious optimism. I think they're starting to believe it. That's more faith than I have in most people, Mace said. Zeth allowed himself a brief smile. All right, let's keep them guessing. Tessa, give them a little fireworks show. Tessa obliged, sending a volley of plasma bolts towards the Vexari ships to add to the sensory overload. The display was dazzling, bright enough to make even the sun's mother squint. Pretty, Callie said, her eyes reflecting the light show. Hope they've got sunglasses. The Vexari ships reeled, their formation breaking apart as they struggled to regain control. It was a small victory, but enough to buy the Resolute some breathing room. Nice work, team, Zeth said, his voice carrying a note of genuine pride. Let's keep them on their toes. As the Vexari scrambled, the Resolute darted through the chaos like a drunk at a wedding dance floor, unpredictable and just a little bit dangerous. Got any more tricks up your sleeve, Captain? Callie asked, her fingers never ceasing their dance over the controls. Zeth sighed. I'm fresh out of rabbits and hats, but give me a minute. Well, we could try surrendering, Mace suggested, his tone so dry it could start a brush fire. But then we'd miss out on all this fun. Zeth chuckled despite himself. I'll pass on that particular adventure. The Vexari regrouped, their ships reforming with the grim determination of someone who'd just been told the bar was closing soon. They pressed in tighter, their anger palpable even through the cold vacuum of space. They're coming back for round 2. Tessa said, her voice a mix of fear and adrenaline. Then we'll just have to keep them guessing, Zeth replied. Callie, keep messing with their sensors. Mace, find us another card to play. Zeth knew it was a matter of time before the Vexari saw through their ruse. They needed something more than tricks and bravado, and they needed it fast. Still no miracle in your pocket, Captain? Callie asked, her focus never wavering. Miracles are for people who plan ahead, Zeth replied. We're more of a last-minute miracle kind of crew. Always flying by the seat of our pants, Mace said. It's what we're best at. The Vexari ships were closing in again, their weapons charging for another assault. The Resolute had bought itself some time, but the clock was ticking and not in their favor. All right, team, Zeth said, his voice steady despite the chaos. We keep them confused. We keep them guessing. And most importantly, we keep ourselves alive. The crew of the Resolute was battered, beleaguered, and running on fumes. But they were also human, stubbornly defiant in the face of insurmountable odds. Let's show them how humans play the game, Zeth said, a fierce grin on his face. And make sure they never forget it. And with that, the Resolute plunged back into the fray, a beacon of defiance against the vast, uncaring void. They had no real plan, but they had each other, and sometimes that was all you needed to stare down the universe and laugh. The UHS Resolute was the kind of ship that might have qualified as a fixer-upper if anyone had been foolish enough to buy it in the first place. Instead, it was held together by metaphorical baling wire and the crew's sheer bloody-mindedness, or perhaps a particularly stubborn form of hope. But just as the crew was beginning to think their luck had turned, the Vexari pulled out their trump card, a new genetically engineered weapon that was far more charming and deadly than a rabid space weasel. The first sign of trouble came from Callie, who was glued to her console like an overcaffeinated tech wizard. Captain, I'm picking up some weird readings. Something's coming our way, and it ain't friendly. Captain Zeth Meerden knew all too well that weird readings was space jargon for bad news. Define weird, Callie. Are we talking mildly unsettling or, oh God, we're all going to die? Somewhere in the middle, leaning towards the latter, Callie replied, fingers flying over the controls. Looks like some kind of biological weapon. Vexari signature all over it. Zeth sighed, a sound like a man who'd seen too many bad space movies and knew how they ended. Great. Just what we need. Mace, any chance we can outrun whatever fresh hell they've cooked up? Mace's voice crackled over the comms, tinged with the kind of cheeriness only found in the severely deluded or dangerously optimistic. Outrun. Not unless we're planning to hitch a ride on a comet. Engines are holding up about as well as a wet paper bag in a storm. Tessa, ever the harbinger of realistic expectations, glanced up from her weapons console. So, we're stuck in a tin can about to be poisoned by alien spores. What else is new? New, not much, Zeth said, running a hand through his hair. But we've got options. Callie, can we jam whatever signals they're using to guide that thing? Callie made a sound that suggested she was less than confident but willing to try. Maybe. If I reroute the power from non-critical systems, we might be able to muddle their guidance. Non-critical systems. Mace chimed in, voice dripping with sarcasm. What, like life support? Everything's negotiable, Zeth replied, leaning back in his chair. Mace, you're on backup. Figure out a way to keep this rust bucket from falling apart while Callie works her magic. Always a pleasure to be the glue holding this operation together, Mace said, the transmission crackling with his usual wit. Callie was already hard at work, her fingers a blur of motion. All right, diverting power now. Let's see if we can make their day as miserable as Ior's. Zeth watched the holo display, where the Vexari weapon loomed like a particularly aggressive boogaman. Tessa, keep a finger on the trigger. If this goes sideways, we'll need to put on a fireworks show that'll make the 4th of July look like a quiet evening. Tessa nodded, her eyes never leaving the targeting display. Ready when you are, Captain. The bridge hummed with the tension of a crew that knew they were in over their heads but were too stubborn to give up. Or maybe they just didn't know what else to do. Human spirit and all that nonsense. Callie's console beeped, and she gave a triumphant if slightly manic grin. Jamming signal active. Let's hope their weapon's as dumb as it looks. Zeth watched the holo display, where the Vexari weapon began to falter, its path erratic like a drunken sailor. Looks like they didn't anticipate this particular monkey wrench. Yeah, well, humans have a knack for breaking things, Mace added. Especially things that aren't Ior's. Speaking of breaking things, Tessa said, I've got a lock. Ready to go on your mark, Captain. Zeth considered his options, which were limited to act now or pray for a miracle. Experience had taught him that the universe rarely handed out miracles like party favors. Do it, Tessa. Give them something to remember us by. Tessa fired, the resolute shuddering as it unleashed a barrage of plasma. The Vexari weapon, already confused by the jamming, took the hit like a prize fighter with a glass jaw. It shattered, sending debris spiraling into the void. Well, that was satisfying, Callie said, visibly relaxing as the immediate threat was neutralized. Nothing like a good explosion to brighten the day. Zeth allowed himself a moment of relief, but only a moment. Good work, everyone, but don't get too comfortable. The Vexari won't take kindly to us smashing their toys. Pretty sure they already hate us, Tessa pointed out. This is just adding insult to injury. Mace's voice came through the comms as if he'd been listening to the universe's worst joke. Well, if it's any consolation, the engines didn't explode with the plasma volley, so there's that. Always a silver lining, Zeth said, shaking his head. All right, eyes sharp. They'll have more tricks up their sleeves. No sooner had he spoken than Callie let out a low whistle. Captain, I'm picking up another signal. Bigger this time. Looks like their idea of an encore. Great, Zeth muttered. Never a dull moment with these guys. The new threat appeared on the holo display. A massive Vexari cruiser, bristling with weapons that promised a bad day for anyone in their path. It was the kind of ship that made nasty surprise seem like a polite understatement. Tessa grimaced. They really don't know how to take a hint. Or maybe they just don't like losing, Zeth said. Mace, we got anything left in our bag of tricks? Nothing that won't blow us up along with them, Mace replied. But I'm open to suggestions. Suggestions? Zeth mused aloud, tapping his chin. How about we just ask them nicely to leave us alone? Callie snorted. Yeah, I'm sure that'll go over well. Maybe offer them a fruit basket while we're at it. All right, new plan, Zeth said. Callie, get ready to jam anything that looks like it might be pointed at us. Tessa, same drill. We hit them hard and fast. The Resolute surged forward, moving with an agility that belied its battered appearance. The crew was tense but focused, a ragtag band of misfits with nothing to lose and everything to gain. As they closed in, the Vexari cruiser opened fire, its guns lighting up the void with a deadly light show that made the previous encounter look like a warm-up act. Here we go again, Tessa muttered, adjusting her aim. Don't worry, Zeth said, his voice steady. We've been through worse. You mean like that time we got stuck in the gravity well of a collapsing star? Callie asked, eyes glued to her screen. Exactly, Zeth said, grinning despite himself. And we're still here to talk about it. The Resolute weaved through the incoming fire, its crew working in unison like an orchestra of chaos. Plasma bolts streaked past, some too close for comfort, but through sheer skill or dumb luck, they managed to avoid the worst of it. Jamming their systems now, Callie announced, her voice a blend of concentration and determination. The Vexari cruiser hesitated, its targeting faltering as Callie's interference took hold. It was an opening, and Zeth wasn't about to waste it. Tessa now, the Resolute unleashed its own volley, plasma bolts tearing through space. The Vexari cruiser reeled under the assault, its shields flickering under the strain. Looks like we've got their attention, Mace commented dryly, watching the display. Good, Zeth said. Let's make sure they know we're serious. The crew was a blur of activity, each member focused on their part of the battle. It was a dance they knew well, a rhythm born of countless encounters where the stakes were life and death. Captain, their shields are weakening, Tessa reported, excitement creeping into her voice. Then let's give them a parting gift, Zeth said. Callie, keep them off balance. Tessa, finish it. Tessa fired again, the Resolute pouring everything it had into the final assault. The Vexari cruiser buckled under the onslaught, its shields failing and hull rupturing in a blaze of light and debris. The crew watched as the Vexari threat imploded, the harsh beauty of the explosion a testament to their tenacity. For a moment, they allowed themselves to savor the victory, a hard-won breath of respite in the unforgiving void. Well, that was fun, Callie said, leaning back in her chair. Remind me never to go on vacation with you guys. Zeth chuckled, a sound of relief and exhaustion. You know you love it. Now let's figure out how to get the hell out of here before they send more friends. Mace's voice came through, laden with his usual sardonic humor. Assuming the engines don't decide to quit on us first, they're barely holding it together. We'll deal with it, Zeth said. One crisis at a time. As the Resolute limped away from the battlefield, the crew was reminded that survival was its own reward. They were a battered, mismatched group, but they were still here, still fighting. And that was more than enough for now. Think they'll come back for more? Tessa asked, her voice steady in the aftermath. Probably, Zeth admitted. But next time we'll be ready. The Resolute sailed through the void, its crew a testament to human ingenuity, resilience, and the occasional stroke of luck. They were scrappy, irreverent, and maybe a little insane, but they were alive. And sometimes in the grim darkness of space, that was the most victorious feeling of all. The Resolute might have been limping away from the recent skirmish, victorious but scarred, yet the universe had a penchant for throwing a curveball when you least expected it. And oh boy, did it throw one now. Captain Zeth Meerden was just settling into the uncomfortable groove of his command chair. Uncomfortable because it was half a recycled seat from the ship's original dining area, when the ship shuddered with an ominous groan. The kind of groan that implied the vessel's guts were on the edge of giving up the ghost. Everybody hold on to something that won't break, Zeth called, barely half joking. Tessa's voice crackled over the comms. Captain, we've got a breach in the outer hull. Doesn't seem like the Vexari are keen on letting us leave their party without a farewell gift. Zeth's stomach did a little flip. Not the kind of gift I was hoping for. Can someone fetch me a return receipt? Mace's voice chimed in, dripping with his usual sarcasm. I'm sure we can send it back with a strongly worded letter. Maybe an angry emoji or two. Callie was already tapping away at her console, her fingers flying across the keys like a concert pianist who'd had too much caffeine. Hull breach is spreading, she reported, sounding more irritated than panicked. If we don't patch it soon, we'll be getting a first-hand tour of the vacuum outside. And trust me, it's not on my bucket list. Could be worse, Mace added, ever the optimist. We could be dealing with Vexari spores again. You're all heart, Mace, Zeth replied, scanning the holo display for any signs of incoming Vexari reinforcements. Any bright ideas on how we keep the ship from turning into a cosmic colander? Maybe we just tape it up with hopes and dreams, Callie suggested with a dry chuckle, though she never stopped working. The ship lurched again, and Zeth gripped the armrest harder. Let's hope we can conjure up a miracle before we're breathing vacuum. Just then, the door to the bridge slid open, revealing Lieutenant Sierra Valen, the ship's resident tactical officer and all-around thorn in everyone's side. She had that look in her eyes, half crazy, half brilliant, that usually meant she'd cooked up something outrageous. I've got a plan, Sierra announced, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. But it's going to require us to exploit the Vexari's one glaring weakness. And what might that be? Zeth asked, arching an eyebrow. Their poor taste in interior decorating, Sierra grinned, a mischievous glint in her eye. Close. It's their complete lack of understanding of human culture, specifically our ability to bluff. Bluff? Tessa asked, her skepticism evident in her tone. You think we can bluff our way out of a hull breach? Not out of the breach, Sierra clarified, but out of the mess we've gotten ourselves into with the Vexari. If we can convince them we're more trouble than we're worth, they might just back off long enough for us to patch things up. Zeth considered the idea, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. So, we're going to pull the interstellar equivalent of a poker face, huh? Fake it till we make it. Exactly, Sierra replied, her enthusiasm contagious despite the dire situation. But it'll need every ounce of bravado we can muster. Mace chuckled softly. Good thing bravado is the only thing we have in spades. Zeth nodded, feeling a strange mix of excitement and dread coiling in his gut. All right, Sierra, lay it out for us. What's your plan? Sierra leaned over the console, bringing up a display of the Vexari fleet and their positions. We need to send a message, something that'll make them think twice before coming after us again. Something so audacious, they'll be convinced we're either insane or dangerous. Preferably both. Sounds like a standard Tuesday, Callie quipped, adjusting her headset. We'll rig up a false signal, Sierra explained, her fingers dancing over the keyboard as she outlined the plan. Something that mimics the energy signature of a Class 5 plasmatic annihilator. Mace let out a low whistle. That's a mouthful. What's it do, exactly? It doesn't do anything, Sierra said, because it doesn't exist. But if the Vexari think we have a weapon that powerful, they might decide it's not worth the risk. And how do we make it convincing? Tessa inquired, skepticism laced with a hint of intrigue. We'll need to reroute power from our remaining non-critical systems, Sierra replied, glancing at Callie. Think you can handle that? Callie shrugged. If I can keep this heap from falling apart on a good day, I can make it look like we're packing heat. And Mace, Sierra continued, you'll need to make sure the ship looks like it's struggling to contain something powerful. Lights flickering, systems overloading, the works. Mace cracked his knuckles, a grin spreading across his face. Finally, something I can really screw up. Guess that leaves me to play the part of the overconfident leader, Zeth said, settling into his chair with a wry smile. Not much of a stretch. The Resolute's bridge came alive with frenetic energy as the crew set about their tasks. Wires were crossed, Systems were pushed to their limits, and the hull breach loomed like a specter in the background, a constant reminder of the stakes. "Signals ready," Callie announced, her voice steady despite the chaos. "All we need now is a little theatrics." "Consider it showtime," Zeth said. He opened the comms channel to the Vexari fleet, pushing down the fear that threatened to bubble to the surface. "This is Captain Zeth Mearden of the UHS Resolute. You've been kind enough to leave us a parting gift, but we thought we'd return the favor." He paused, letting the silence build tension. "You see, we've been working on a little something special, a weapon with enough firepower to make your fleet look like a historical footnote. So unless you fancy becoming space debris, I suggest you back off." The Resolute shuddered as Callie and Mace triggered the false signal, the ship systems flickering wildly, lights dimming and surging as if barely holding back a catastrophic release. It was a convincing show, if Zeth did say so himself. The Vexari's response came moments later, a terse acknowledgement that spoke volumes. "We are considering your proposition," their leader said, the translation filter barely masking the tension in their voice. "Stand by." "Well, that wasn't a no thanks," Tessa remarked, her fingers drumming on the console as they awaited the Vexari decision. Zeth nodded, trying to project an air of confidence he didn't entirely feel. "And now we wait. Everybody stay ready in case they decide to call our bluff." The minutes ticked by like hours, the crew on edge, every sound and shudder of the ship amplified by the silence of anticipation. It was a gamble, and they all knew it, but sometimes the biggest risks paid off in the biggest ways. Finally, the comms crackled to life again, the Vexari leader's voice filled with reluctant respect. "We have weighed our options. It seems you are more formidable than we anticipated. We will withdraw our forces, for now." Zeth let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Wise choice," he replied, keeping his tone even. "Let's hope we don't have to meet again under such contentious circumstances." With that, the Vexari fleet began to pull back, their ships retreating into the depths of space like a tide receding from a battered shoreline. It was over for now, but Zeth knew they'd be back. They always came back. "Nice job, everyone," Zeth said, a genuine smile tugging at his lips. "Looks like we get to live to fight another day. Assuming we can patch the hull and keep the ship from imploding," Mace added with a smirk. Callie glanced up from her console, a weary but satisfied grin on her face. "Hey, after pulling off that stunt, everything else is going to feel like a vacation." "Don't jinx it," Tessa warned, though even she couldn't hide her relief. Zeth rose from his chair, stretching the tension from his muscles. "All right, let's get to work on those repairs before anything else decides to break. We might have bluffed our way out of a fight, but we can't bluff away a hull breach." The crew got to work, the ship buzzing with the frenetic energy of a team that had just cheated death. They were bruised, battered, but very much alive, and maybe a little closer for having faced the impossible together. As Zeth watched his crew, a band of misfits held together by little more than stubbornness and a shared will to survive, he couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride. They'd pulled it off against all odds, and for now, that was victory enough. As the Resolute navigated away from the scene of their triumph, Zeth found himself chuckling softly. "Just another day in paradise, huh?" Sierra grinned, joining him at the helm. "With a crew like this, paradise is right where we make it. And in the vast, unforgiving void, that was the best they could hope for." "So, Sierra," Zeth said, rubbing his temples as if trying to massage sense into the resident chaos. "We pulled off one hell of a bluff. Now, do you have more tricks up your sleeve, or was that the grand finale?" Sierra twirled a stray lock of hair, the epitome of casual amidst the impending doom. "Actually, I was thinking we doubled down. If we've already sold them on a lie, why not keep them guessing with some good old-fashioned human unpredictability?" "Let me guess," Mace interjected, grinning like a man who knows he's about to enjoy someone else's misery. "You want to throw a cosmic rave and confuse them with flashing lights and terrible music." "Close," Sierra replied, her eyes narrowing on the holo display, where the Vexari fleet lingered far too close for comfort. We bombard them with signals of human trivialities, stuff they find utterly nonsensical. Callie raised an eyebrow, pausing her work on the hull breach, a task that seemed as futile as bailing water out of a sinking ship with a thimble. You're banking on alien confusion over cat videos and game shows. Exactly, Sierra nodded vigorously. They don't understand why we waste time on such things. It'll drive them nuts trying to decode the unimportant. Sounds like my kind of psychological warfare, Mace said, leaning back in his chair. Count me in for making them question their life choices. Tessa, eyebrows furrowed, was less convinced. You're telling me we're going to annoy an alien fleet into submission? That's the plan. Well, it's either that or we sit here and wait for them to get bored and blow us to pieces, Zeth replied dryly, glancing at Tessa. And frankly, I prefer going out while they're trying to figure out why a two-legged creature with a cucumber is funny. The crew set about their task with a mix of skepticism and amusement. There was something genuinely liberating about weaponizing the absurd. Callie rigged the communications panel to broadcast a continuous loop of human entertainment. Snippets of reality shows, sports highlights, and cat compilations. A curated selection of humanity's finest distractions. All right, Sierra said, her fingers dancing over the keys. Let's see how the Vexari handle a taste of human culture. Zeth watched the screens flicker, the audio snippets playing over the comms with all the randomness of a teenager's playlist. And this won't make us the laughing stock of the galaxy. How, exactly? Because, Sierra said, straightening up with a grin, if they can't understand what they're seeing, they're going to think it's code. And you know what they say about brains and puzzles. They're like me and overtime, Mace chimed in. Not a fan. As the signals broadcast out into the void, the crew watched and waited. The Vexari ships, so sleek and orderly, began to exhibit signs of disarray. Communication lines buzzed with frantic chatter as the alien fleet struggled to make sense of the human transmissions. Their ships drifted slightly out of formation as if the collective IQ of their armada had taken a nosedive. Looks like it's working, Tessa remarked, her tone a mix of disbelief and amusement. I think their flagship just tilted. Either they are testing out new angles or our plan has turned them into a cosmic art installation. Zeth allowed himself a chuckle, the first real laugh in days. Never underestimate the power of a good distraction, or a badly sung karaoke rendition of I Will Survive. Callie shook her head, still amazed at the simplicity of their tactic. Who knew the key to interstellar warfare was the same tactic used to torture teenagers and annoying younger siblings, Mace added. As the crew continued their digital barrage, the Vexari fleet's confusion only grew. Ships drifted dangerously close to one another, their disciplined maneuvers falling apart in the face of incomprehensible madness. The sight was almost comical, like watching a group of ballroom dancers suddenly thrust into a mosh pit. Confusion setting in, Sierra observed, glancing at Zeth. What's the next move, Captain? Zeth leaned back in his command chair, the recycled seat creaking under his weight. Keep him guessing. Let's see if they implode under the weight of their own frustration. The crew worked tirelessly to keep the barrage going, rotating content to maximize confusion. Videos of humans slipping on banana peels played alongside debates about the merits of pineapple on pizza. The culmination of human irrelevance was their weapon now, and it was surprisingly effective. Incoming communication from the Vexari, Tessa announced, adjusting her headset. They probably want to offer us a reality show deal. Zeth waved his hand for her to put it through, the channel opening with a crackle. This is Captain Zeth Meerden, he said, trying to maintain an air of authority amidst the chaos. Can I help you, or do you need more recommendations for your watch list? The Vexari leader's voice crackled through the speakers, laden with confusion and a hint of desperation. We do not understand. What is the purpose of this display? Zeth exchanged a knowing glance with Sierra before responding. That's the human condition for you, endlessly perplexing. We're just sharing a taste of our culture, a little something to keep you entertained while you think about your next move." There was a long pause on the line, the kind that indicated the Vexari leader was either experiencing an existential crisis or desperately trying to maintain composure. "We are not amused," the leader finally replied, each word dripping with restrained irritation. "That's because you're not human," Zeth replied with a smirk. "Our sense of humor is an acquired taste." The comms fell silent again, leaving the crew in suspense, wondering if they had pushed the Vexari too far. But then the screens flickered with signs of a mass retreat. "They're pulling back," Tessa said, her voice tinged with disbelief. "It's like they're running away, or just taking a really long coffee break," Mace suggested. "I hear confusion is exhausting." Zeth couldn't help but feel a swell of pride at the sight of the withdrawing Vexari fleet. They hadn't defeated the enemy with firepower or advanced technology, but with the sheer, inexplicable nature of humanity itself. It was an unexpected victory, one that spoke volumes about their ability to adapt and survive. Still, the captain knew better than to celebrate prematurely. The Vexari weren't gone for good. They were simply regrouping, trying to decipher the enigma that was humanity, and when they returned, they'd likely be prepared for the unexpected. "All right, team," Zeth said, addressing his crew. "We've bought ourselves some time, but we can't rest easy just yet. Let's get to work on those repairs and make sure we're ready for round 2. Callie nodded, already moving back to her tools. "You know, after this, I don't think I'll ever look at cat videos the same way again." "I'll admit it was a stroke of lunacy," Sierra said with a grin, "but it worked. And that's the beauty of human ingenuity. We're our own kind of crazy." Zeth watched his crew spring into action, their spirits lifted, if only for a moment. They were a ragtag bunch, full of flaws and imperfections, but they were resourceful and determined. In a universe that often seemed to conspire against them, they had found a way to turn the tide with humor and a touch of madness. As the Resolute drifted through the stars, Zeth couldn't shake the feeling that they were destined for more adventures, each as unpredictable as the last. And with his crew by his side, he was ready for whatever the universe threw their way. "So, Captain," Sierra said, joining him at the helm, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "What's next on our agenda? More cultural exchange?" Zeth chuckled, shaking his head. "Let's start with getting this ship back to something resembling operational. Then who knows, maybe we'll pick up a few more tricks along the way." "And if the Vexari return?" Tessa asked, her voice steady but curious. "Then we'll do what humans do best," Zeth replied, his gaze fixed on the endless expanse of space. "Improvise." With the repairs underway and the crew's spirits buoyed by their unconventional victory, the Resolute pressed on, a testament to the resilience and absurdity of the human spirit. In the end, it was their unpredictability that set them apart in a universe of rigid logic and unyielding order. As they navigated the stars, Zeth couldn't help but smile, the weight of their victory, however temporary, lightening his burden. "Onward," he murmured to himself, the darkness of space stretching out before them, full of possibilities and challenges that only a crew like his could appreciate. For now, they had outwitted their foes with the kind of charm and chaos that only humans could muster, proving once again that sometimes the greatest weapon of all is the ability to laugh in the face of adversity. As they ventured into the unknown, Zeth knew that whatever awaited them, they'd face it together, with humor, courage, and a healthy dose of irreverence. The Resolute's control room was abuzz with the kind of energy you'd expect when someone pretends to have everything under control. The screens flickered as the Vexari ships sauntered away from the hyperspace rift zone, their orderly retreat a silent testament to the chaos sown by humanity's finest distractions. The crew of the Resolute basked in a momentary feeling of triumph, like a group of bank robbers realizing the vault was left open. No need to apologize, they'd take the win and run with it. "You know, it's not every day you escape annihilation because someone can't resist a good falling on the banana peel gag," Zeth quipped, resting back in his command chair that looked suspiciously like it had been stolen from a galactic budget airline. Mace was busy at a console, which looked like it had been put together by a toddler with a glue gun. Makes you wonder what would happen if we sent them a cookbook. Maybe they'd end up serving us dinner next time. Or just poison it, Tessa retorted, spitting out her words with characteristic skepticism. We're not out of the woods. It's more like we've wandered into a slightly less hostile part of the jungle. Zeth glanced around at his crew, all engaged in the Sisyphean task of making the Resolute resemble something that wouldn't blow up with a strong sneeze. Hey, it's a start. And maybe they'll go home and think twice before picking a fight with the universe's equivalent of a circus troupe. Callie was hunched over a holo display, which provided all the clarity of a fortune teller's crystal ball. Hull's still bleeding air like a stuck pig over here, she announced, her tone as cheery as a tax audit. But nothing a little duct tape can't handle. I mean, it's space-rated, right? You mean the tape or the pig? Sierra interjected, smirking as she joined the group at the front. Her fingers danced over her own console, which, by all rights, belonged in a museum of old tech, if not a scrapyard. I mean, for all we know, the Vexari are going to spend the next year trying to interpret our cultural nuances as some sort of war code. Zeth nodded approvingly, the weight of their transient victory not completely lost on him. Well, if confusion's the best weapon we've got, then let's keep them guessing. But first, anyone seen my wrench? The mood on board was a mix of gallows humor and genuine surprise at their own survival. This wasn't so much a victory march as it was a stumbling run for cover after setting off a firework display backward. We should start a new tradition, Mace declared as he wrestled with a control panel that seemed to be held together by resentment and a few loose screws. The great galactic bamboozle, humans specializing in defeating overwhelmingly superior forces with sheer ridiculousness. Sierra chuckled, shaking her head. They'll write about us in the history books. How to annoy an alien fleet into submission. A case study. More like a cautionary tale, Tessa said, her attention only half on the conversation as she tweaked a console. We might have pulled this off once, but I wouldn't bank on cosmic slapstick saving our skins next time. The crew's laughter filled the control room, a much-needed respite in the middle of a universe that rarely offered them a break. It wasn't much, but their spirits were lifted, and for the moment, that was enough. But seriously, anyone actually working on that hull breach? Zeth asked, casting a stern, if somewhat bemused, look around the room. I'd rather not float home in pieces. Callie raised a hand, her expression a mix of sarcasm and nonchalance. On it, Captain. But if we had a couple more hands, or maybe a miracle or two, that wouldn't hurt. Zeth nodded, knowing full well the ship operated on miracles more often than he'd like to admit. Keep us in one piece, and I'll make sure your drinks are on me next time we hit a port. Assuming there's something left of this rust bucket to dock, Tessa added, her voice tinged with the kind of gallows humor that had become their default setting. As repairs got underway, the crew found themselves slipping into a rhythm, the kind that came with having nothing to lose and everything to prove. They were a motley bunch, unorthodox, irreverent, and somehow, against all odds, still alive. Remember when the worst thing we had to worry about was whether or not the coffee maker was on the fritz? Sierra mused, wiping a smudge of grease from her cheek. Ah, those halcyon days of minor inconveniences, Mace said, rolling his eyes. I miss when weird readings meant someone accidentally turned on the microwave while the shields were up. Speaking of which, Callie piped up, her head still buried in the holo display. The engines are running like a drunken rhinoceros again. If I can't get them sorted, we'll end up hitching a ride on a passing asteroid. Hope everyone packed their space helmets. Don't worry, Zeth said, with the kind of optimism that belied the chaos around him. With the Vexari retreating, we've got a little breathing room. And hey, if they come back, maybe we'll just broadcast our blooper reel. The crew laughed, knowing full well the absurdity of their situation. They were far from safe, and the threat of the Vexari loomed large. But for now, they had the luxury of not being vaporized, and that was more than enough. Keep those engines from blowing us sky high, and maybe we'll live to die another day, Tessa said, her voice a mix of sarcasm and genuine hope. We've bought ourselves some time, Sierra added. Time to fix what we can and come up with the next crazy plan that'll keep us out of the morgue. And maybe, Mace said, leaning back with a self-satisfied grin, we'll even make a little history while we're at it. Zeth looked around at his crew, a ragtag group of misfits and rebels who had somehow become a family. They were what made the Resolute worth fighting for, and in this moment, as they laughed and plotted their next move, he knew they'd face whatever came next together. Well, they say if at first you don't succeed, Zeth began, letting a pause hang in the air like a bad smell. Try again. Callie finished, her tone genuine. No, Zeth said, grinning. You run in the other direction and figure out something new. Laughter erupted in the control room as Zeth's crew went back to work, their spirits buoyed by the knowledge that, against the odds, they had survived. It would take more than bluster and bravado to hold their own against the Vexari, but for now, they were content to take each victory as it came. As the Resolute drifted through space, Zeth couldn't help but feel a sense of camaraderie and strength in their shared resilience. They were more than just a crew, they were a force to be reckoned with, unyielding in the face of disaster. All right, folks, Zeth called out, a half-smile tugging at his lips. Let's get this thing running like it ought to, and then maybe we'll figure out how to beat them at their own game, or at least keep them confused long enough to forget they ever wanted to blow us to smithereens, Mace added. As the crew continued their repairs and preparations, the sense of purpose and determination in the air was palpable. They may have been underdogs, but they were scrappy and full of surprises, and that was precisely what made them dangerous. Here's to the Resolute, Zeth said, raising an imaginary glass in a toast. May we continue to be the most irritating, unpredictable bunch of misfits in the galaxy. The crew cheered, their voices echoing in the control room as they got back to work, united in their resolve and ready to face whatever came next. With laughter and irreverence, they pressed on, knowing that together they could defy the odds and carve their own path through the stars. The Resolute's control room was as lively as a worm-infested apple, with the crew buzzing like a pack of annoyed bees. It was the kind of energy that comes from cheating death, a cocktail of adrenaline, disbelief, and the kind of relief you'd ordinarily find at the end of a really bad blind date. Zeth Meerden, the captain and unofficial purveyor of gallows humor, lounged back in his command chair, which had all the ergonomic support of a rusty lawn chair. Who would have thought a banana peel gag could send a whole alien fleet running with their tails between their legs? Zeth mused, casting a wry smile at his crew. Mace, wrangling a console that looked like it had been assembled by raccoons on a sugar high, snorted. Makes you wonder if we shouldn't start solving intergalactic diplomacy issues with a rubber chicken. Tessa merely scoffed, her skepticism as much a part of her as the grease stains on her uniform. Don't get too comfy. We're not exactly lounging in a five-star resort here. More like, welcome to the jungle, try not to get eaten. Zeth shook his head, eyes scanning the makeshift bridge. He could barely hear himself think over the cacophony of clanking tools and muttered curses, a symphony of barely controlled chaos. It was a miracle they were still in one piece, and miracles didn't come easy in this corner of the universe. Right, who's got the duct tape? Zeth asked, his voice rising above the din. Callie, hunched over a holo display that seemed determined to show her everything except what she needed, raised a hand. I think we're fresh out, Cap. We're at the mercy of space-rated chewing gum and hopes that the air doesn't get any thinner. Sierra, who had been fiddling with a console that belonged in a history museum, piped up with a smirk. You mean air or Mace's patience? Because I'm betting on the air. Very funny, Sierra, Mace muttered. But if these circuits fry again, patience is the least of our worries. The laughter that erupted was the kind that left you wondering if it wasn't just a little bit hysterical. But it was laughter nonetheless, and in their line of work, that was practically currency. Zeth leaned back, rubbing his temples with the kind of fond exasperation a parent might reserve for their unruly children. All right, all right. Let's not get too carried away with the comedy ire. If we end up floating home, who's gonna do the paperwork? Callie chuckled. Always the optimist, Cap. I think the paperwork would be the least of our problems if we're floating. True, but still, Zeth replied with a grin. I'd like to avoid having to report death by floating to the higher-ups. They'd probably just laugh. As the crew continued their repairs, the atmosphere aboard the Resolute was one of camaraderie, like soldiers sharing a drink after a hard-fought battle. They'd faced down the Vexari fleet with nothing but audacity and a care package of humanity's worst humor, and they'd walked away with their lives. It wasn't much, but it was enough. So, what's the plan now? Tessa asked, wiping engine grease off her hands like a medieval knight cleaning a sword after battle. Zeth shrugged. We fix what we can, patch the rest with our collective willpower, and make a report that won't get us laughed out of the galaxy. And then what? Callie pressed, her eyes lingering on the holo display that was reluctantly cooperating. Then we wait, Zeth said, his voice softer, more serious. We wait and see if the Vexari decide they want a rematch, or if we've scared them off for good. Mace snorted. Yeah, because nothing says fearsome adversaries like the Three Stooges in space. Sierra chuckled. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Although in our case, if it ain't broke is more wishful thinking than reality. The crew continued to work, their banter a comforting backdrop to the ever-present hum of the ship. Each clang, each beep, each expletive was a reminder that, against all odds, they were still here, still fighting, still laughing. They were a stubborn bunch, a family forged in the fires of surviving the absurdity of the cosmos. Zeth glanced around, taking in the sight of his crew. They were worn, weary, and in desperate need of a vacation, but they were alive, and in their line of work, that was the most you could ask for. All right, Zeth called out, drawing their attention. Once we've got this bucket of bolts patched up and limping along, we're gonna put together one hell of a report, something that'll make those desk jockeys wish they'd been here. And by here you mean in the line of fire? Tessa asked, raising an eyebrow. Exactly, Zeth said with a grin. We'll make sure they know just how close we came to becoming space dust, and how we pulled it off with little more than chutzpah and bad jokes. Mace shook his head, a smile tugging at his lips. Let's just make sure the engines don't implode before they get a chance to read about our heroics. As they continued to work, the crew found themselves reflecting on their victory. It was the kind of victory that made you question everything you thought you knew about the universe. They'd faced down a superior alien force with humor and humility, and they'd won. It was an experience that would alter the very fabric of humanity's approach to alien encounters, assuming they lived long enough to implement it. Think this'll change anything? Callie asked, her voice quieter now, introspective. Maybe, Zeth replied, his gaze distant. If nothing else, it proves we're a force to be reckoned with even if we don't look like it. Sierra nodded. Maybe they'll start taking us more seriously now. Or maybe they'll just start sending us rubber chickens with the MRE. The crew laughed, a sound that carried with it a sense of renewed purpose. They'd face the abyss and come back stronger, more united than ever. They were ready for whatever came next, even if it meant more banana peels. All right, everyone, Zeth said, clapping his hands to get their attention. Let's get this ship back to a state that's slightly less embarrassing. We might need it again soon. To fight the Vexari or the coffee maker, Tessa quipped, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Whichever comes first, Zeth replied, grinning. Now back to work. We've got a galaxy to annoy. As the crew got back to their tasks, the air was filled with a sense of possibility. They'd survived the impossible, and now they were ready to face the future with the same irreverence and determination that had seen them through this ordeal. Here's to the Resolute, Zeth called out once more, raising his imaginary glass in a toast. May we continue to be the most obnoxious, unpredictable crew in the galaxy. The crew cheered, their voices a testament to their resilience and spirit. They were a motley crew, a band of misfits and rebels, but they were also a family, and that was what made them strong. As the Resolute drifted through space, Zeth couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in his crew. They'd faced unimaginable odds and come out on top, and now they were ready to face whatever the universe threw their way. "All right, folks," Zeth said, his voice filled with warmth and determination. "Let's show the galaxy what we're made of." With laughter and camaraderie as their weapons, the crew of the Resolute pressed on, ready to defy the odds and carve their own path through the stars. Their experiences had changed them, bonded them, and now they were stronger than ever, ready to face the future with all the humor and irreverence they could muster. In the end, it wasn't just about survival. It was about thriving in a universe that rarely gave second chances. And as the Resolute sailed forward, the crew knew they were more than just a team. They were a force to be reckoned with, unyielding in the face of adversity and ready for whatever came next. "Here's to us," Zeth said softly, his eyes scanning the stars. "The crew of the Resolute. Long may we irritate the universe." And with that, the Resolute continued its journey, the laughter and banter of its crew echoing through the corridors, a beacon of resilience and hope in the vast expanse of space.